Hi everybody, my name is Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. It's a pleasure to see you today. I am happy to finally be getting to this Anuradha video. It's been a little while since we've returned to our Nakshatra series. We are, in fact, going through today the Anuradha Nakshatra. This is one of the nakshatras. The deity of Anuradha Nakshatra is a deity that is one of the earliest and a very important figure in the earliest of Vedic literature on the whole. Mitra is found usually in a combined pair with Varuna, who rules Shatabhishak Nakshatra. Together they are known as Mitra Varuna, and they make up an important aspect of, together there's a feminine ecstatic eros principle involved with their combined appellation. So, of course, if you're watching this, you know probably how I usually roll with this series. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss Anuradha Nakshatra from three base texts. All of these base texts come from the Taittiriya Brahmana, as I'm going to describe. I'm missing my front page of this guy. Oh well. One of the texts that we'll be reading from is Ernst Wilhelm's text describing the 27 energies of the lunar nakshatras. We're also going to hear from Vic Dicara, our boy Vic Dicara, and his nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. And later on, we're also going to read from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras by an author named Radhe, who does great research on the nakshatras. So I've decided today that I've written out a little bit of a description. You can find this description in your YouTube description box. And I'm going to refer to it here at the beginning because it's a good little synopsis of what's going on with Mitra. Now, first of all, Anuradha, the nakshatra Anuradha, as we know, it is, well, as Vic Dicara describes and explains for us, Anuradha and Vishaka are a pair, just like any of the paired nakshatras. So that's Purva Falguni and Uttara Falguni, Purva Bhadrapada and Uttara Bhadrapada. There's a Purva and an Uttara, previous and an after. Vishaka and Anuradha are a pair, just like these others. And Vic describes it as we're going to get, once we get into his book, you'll see that Vishaka is the first one. Usually the first one is masculine because masculinity initiates. And he also describes the masculine as being sort of, the feminine is like the yin, eternal mother memory center. It's the one that was, even though the masculine acts first, the feminine is like the primordial soup out of which the masculine emerges. So the masculine is considered like the immature, outgoing, trying this energy, and the feminine is the one who comes after and has sort of mastered the energy in a sense, comparatively. So Vishaka is this outgoing male principle. Both of them relate to love and bonding and partnership, as you would have seen in our Vishaka Nakshatra video. Anuradha, I should say first, Vishaka is this sort of objective male energy that wants to bond for an objective. We work well together to create this, to produce this, to have this energy. And Vishaka wants to get into these constructive partnerships. Anuradha just loves the partnership for its own sake, the enjoyment that comes from the shared experience of two people working well together. And it's not about what it gets, it's about what it is. It's the how, it's the feeling. So that's Anuradha. Now, the deity of Anuradha is Mitra. And Mitra is one of the 8 primary adityas found in the earliest segments of the Rig Veda. Again, it's usually in concourse with Varuna. And together they're Mitra Varuna. So Mitra, who rules Anuradha, our nakshatra today, it's all about love. The word mi, M-I, in Mitra means union, and it's rooted similarly to Maituna. The same word mi is in Maituna, which is Gemini. It's pairing. So it kind of signifies love, bondage, a shared root in the essence. It's what I call an aesthetic erotic choice. Mitra represents kin of the soul. It conveys a deep, mercurial, almost prepubescent state of friendship. It's two people who combine together and love each other almost without trying in that sense, you know. So here's a little quick quote from Vic Dicara to kind of pull us into what Anuradha. It's kind of Anuradha in some ways boiled down to its essence. What we read from Vic Dicara is that sex without love is an imitation of Anuradha. And the climax that sex produces has the external form but not the internal soul of true pleasure, true bonding, true soul kinship. Such sex can actually aggravate and exacerbate our wants and needs, because nothing is more frustrating than the experience that the pleasure we seek is so close, yet so elusive. Very interesting little roundabout bringing together. So, this is our Anuradha Nakshatra series. I wanted to give that little intro and kind of see how it felt. You know, I'm always trying different ways of going about these videos and things that I do. Now let's get into our intro proper that you guys would have seen on various of my other videos. This is part of our 27 Nakshatra series. Of course, I am a tropical Vedic astrologer. I overlay the tropical Rashis and signs on top of the 27 sidereal nakshatras. If you want to know a little bit more about the difference between sidereal and tropical, I put a good video out called The Age of Aquarius Debunked that talks about this critical difference between the two. And I'm going to probably be doing more videos on that as time goes on. Now, this is this psychedelic story that goes much beyond what we're describing here. It's much deeper. It comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam. What I've always seen is a good metaphor for what we're talking about here. Essentially, there was a demon, an asura, who got way too big, and he was gobbling up, it's the ego. The ego is gobbling up everything because it's out of alignment with nature and cosmos. So the gods say, this ego's getting too big. Who do we call? We don't call Ghostbusters when there's a demon running about in the old Vedic times. We call Vishnu. So Vishnu appears in the form of an atom, a tiny little dot, a dwarf, a midget. And he goes to the ego, and the ego is this great demon, and Vishnu asks, "Hi there, I'd like a boon, please." The demon says, "What kind of boon do you want?" Vishnu says, "Nothing much, I just want 3 steps, 3 little footsteps." The demon is tricked by this. He just thinks, you're so small. Your tiny little steps are no bigger than a grain of sand. You can have them. Vishnu says, "Great. My first step, I'm going to cover deep space." That's the sidereal zodiac, the stars behind our galaxy. With my second step, I'm going to step into local space. That's the signs of the zodiac, the tropical zodiac. With my third step, where shall I step? And the demon, once it realizes this is Vishnu, the demon humbly says, "You can step on my head." And that is sort of a metaphor for the houses, the horizon, Earth's perspective. There's the stars, there's the ecliptic, the zodiac, and then there's the Earth's spinning perspective. So my intention is to convey the pure essence or nature of the nakshatras as they are without the Rashi associations. So I've got a great intro for this series at the beginning of the playlist that this video is appearing in. If you want to know a bit more about how the signs and the nakshatras are not married together like the sidereal people think they are. Because as tropical astrologers, the signs move against the backdrop of the stars. Every 2,000 years, it's a 24,000 year cycle. So check out my intro video for a bit more on that. But ultimately, the most authentic and undistorted literature we have on the nakshatras, according to our neo-tropical Vedic camp of astrology, the most authentic, undistorted literature comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana. And this is a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda. It's kind of considered to be a continuation of it, and it's got roots in that Vedic, truly Vedic era. And that's why guys like Ernst Wilhelm and Vic Dicara and me, we are using it as a source text for describing the nakshatras. Just to give it short thrift here, a lot of people have the idea that the signs and the nakshatras are blended together. And so this is a problem that came from sidereal astrology, which is only 2,000 years old. It was around 0 AD. Ptolemy named the stars, and people assumed that the stars and the signs are one thing. And so, for example, to those people, Anuradha, I think, exists in Scorpio. So Anuradha is associated with Scorpio qualities. That is a distortion in our camp. Anuradha is something that exists in and of itself. And as time goes on, Anuradha is eventually going to fall into Sagittarius, and then Capricorn, and then Aquarius and Pisces in the 24,000 year cycle. So that's why there's a lot of traditions that will talk about Anuradha will bring in Scorpio qualities without realizing it, and we call that a distortion. The only way to get past that distortion is to reach back to literature that was written before 0 AD. And the Taittiriya Brahmana was written about 2000 BC. 2000 BC, 1000 BC, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. Hard to say exactly, but this is the idea here. Now, we've already talked about one part of this distortion. It's the incorrect zodiac associations. But there's also, Vic Dicara is not into associating the nakshatras with the Vimshottari Lord. It's the planet that rules the first dasha when the moon falls in that nakshatra. You'll see, for example, when we talk about Anuradha, the ancient ruler, as I call it, Saturn, that is still considered to be a distortion, or something that, because Vimshottari and the dasha system was created long after the Taittiriya Brahmana was written. So that could be a distortion point. Ernst Wilhelm is sort of on and off with that particular thing. But I digress. You can always ask me or email me if you want to know a little bit more about that, or watch my intro video in the series. Now, as I delve deeper into nakshatras, I'm realizing that even a lot of what I've got here is not necessarily, it's hard to define the points of the nakshatras in the tropical zodiac. Now, Vic uses the old-fashioned Lahiri Ayanamsha. Ernst kind of has his own Ayanamsha going on. And, I recommend that you try to see the placement of both of these, of any planet or the rising sign, in both of these systems, and use your intuition to try to feel out which one, if your moon or your lagna or whatever planet falls into. Because a lot of the times it's going to be both. It's just an annoying aspect of our reality here. And I should say, so this comes from the fact that it's hard for us tropical Vedic astrologers to pinpoint exactly where these nakshatras fall. Ernst Wilhelm just did a great video with, I should be able to think of it, but it's like Andrew from another dude's channel. I can't think of it right now, but essentially, if you look up Ernst Wilhelm Galactic Center Ayanamsha, you'll see a picture of this video, and it goes into greater detail. Ernst goes into great detail about the Ayanamsha issue and why it's hard to define where these nakshatras are. So I'll say this before we go on. In today's time, we are gathering data for ourselves and for our community on which one we think we are. So you got to feel it out in today's time. Try to be as scientific as possible as you can about these things. Really feel it out, because if you pin your life to one nakshatra and you find out later that it was wrong, that you're living your life through the phantasm of an archetype that doesn't fit you, and that can be very frustrating. So be careful if you're on a cusp. If you're in one system, you're one nakshatra, and another system, you're another. Don't put all your eggs in the nakshatra basket at that point, right? It's worth noting. I digress. So for Vic Dicara's Ayanamsha, which is basically Lahiri, Anuradha falls at 27 degrees of Scorpio, and in Ernst's nakshatra, so it's basically between 26.5 degrees and 9 or 10 degrees. Sorry. Anuradha falls between about 26.5 to 27 degrees of Scorpio to 9 or 10 degrees of Sagittarius. Thankfully, a lot of these nakshatras go very far off from each other, but Anuradha is one of those ones where they're very close. So it's likely if you've got a planet in between this point, like I do, I've got my Mercury in here, it's about 5 degrees. There's not much difference between Vic's and Ernst's, and that's a nice thing. So these are now, we're going to share some 4 classical nakshatra characteristics. These qualities aren't given directly in the Taittiriya Brahmana. They may have been, they might come from these 2 distortion points we've already mentioned. Ernst Wilhelm gives particular emphasis to the kingdom, whether it's animal, plant, or mineral. But a lot of these other qualities, Vic does mention them sometimes. They are mentioned. Where exactly they come from is hard to say. But it is generally regarded that at least these 4 generally tend to come from an understanding of the nakshatra, not necessarily from the rashis. This is just their own thing. So these are our nakshatras considered to be mridu. In fact, it's often considered it's often considered that Anuradha has a very soft nature to it, particularly because it is, let me think here, it's a mridu character, and it also, I believe, is a deva, which I actually don't have here, which is interesting. But it goes to show there's lots of these characteristics. Anuradha, being one of these soft, mild, tender nakshatras, is grouped along with Chitra, Mrigashirsha, and Revati. Its activity is passive, and its yoni animal is the female deer. Now it's interesting that 3 out of the 4 of these mridu, soft nakshatras, 3 out of 4 of them are plant nakshatras, Mula. It's only Revati that has the animal quality. And these are worth talking about. Ernst Wilhelm has given specific emphasis in his book. God, I wish I could find the front of this thing. I'm not going to stress about it if I can't find it. Oh, I see it. Give me one sec here, folks. Nope. That actually wasn't it. Whatever. My room's a bit of a mess at this moment. Jordan Peterson would kill me if he saw this place. In Ernst's book, it's called The 27... The Energies of the 27 Lunar Mansions. Ernst will, it's a little free PDF that he put out there. You can find it on Google. You can find it on his website, astrologyvideos.com. And in this little free PDF, Ernst describes that the 3 qualities of the kingdom, it's, oh gosh, I have to think of the the name of the minerals. You know what? This is worth it, folks. We're just going to do it. I thank you for your patience. Dhatu. Okay, so there's mineral, there's plant, which is Mula, and then there's animal, which is Jiva. That was one of those moments where my, whatever you want to call it, ADHD, whatever, had to figure that out. So they have these three qualities: mineral, plant, and animal. Dhatu, Mula, and Jiva. And Ernst Wilhelm has described this animal kingdom as being a very important key quality of the nakshatras. We can relate these to the qualities of these same three qualities are correlated to the modalities: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Cardinal signs are dhatu, it's mineral. Fixed signs are Mula, which is the plant. And then mutable signs are Jiva, which is the animal. Dhatu, which relates to cardinal signs, has this sort of elemental earth quality to it. It's looking literally at the physical world for physical data. If you're a mechanic and you are ruled by a Dhatu mineral nakshatra, which is not this one, Anuradha's plant. But if you're ruled by a mineral nakshatra, then you are literally going to junkyards, checking out the physical junk heaps and saying, oh, I can take this and refurbish it. You know, going and literally checking out all the different junkyards in your area and talking to those owners who are rooted in the earth and saying, you know, like, well, I do a lot of these types of engines. If I take care of those engines in this town, then you can take care of those engines and we can work together. You know, if somebody comes to me looking for your expertise, I'll refer them to you. You can refer them to me when you're looking for my stuff. That's like Dhatu mineral world. Mula is a little bit more of a trend person. Mula, the plants, are in between minerals and animals. Mula has a combination of the two. And this is a plant nakshatra. Anuradha is considered to be one of these Mula nakshatras. So it's kind of like a communicator. It communicates between, you know, Jiva in the animal nakshatras represent global trends that are happening. It's like the melting pot of all humanity outside of a locale. Dhatu is the locale. Jiva is like global interests. Mula brings them together in the middle. So Mula is going to know the guys who do the Dhatu stuff. He's going to know the mechanics who are in the local area. And the Mula person is kind of a person who gets them all in touch with each other, you know, and says, you know, the Mula knows the things going on the ground. It knows its locale. It knows the people it's working with. But it's also spending a lot of its time taking the energy of these people and going out and finding other tribes, other people in other situations, and focusing on bringing the global interests into the local interests. That's the Mula nakshatras. And there's a lot of metaphors for this in terms of just relating, emotional relating. If your moon is there, then you're going to be somebody who relates socially in this way, likes to operate in love this way. And then, of course, the Jiva people are completely the globalists who are always looking for new, different tribes, different ways of bringing people together, etc. Thank you very much, the thick boy. Cool to see you guys all hanging out here. So Anuradha is a Mula nakshatra. It sort of goes between people. It has its own interests. It can be productive in a way. It's really an organizer, a bringer together of different powers. That's what the plant nakshatras, they're supporting nakshatras in a lot of ways, right? Especially when it comes to business, but also in love, social situations, etc. So Anuradha is a soft and tender plant nakshatra. So it goes about it in a very soft, loving way. And this kind of builds on the character of Anuradha as this sort of loving character, this loving person who loves to just hang out and socialize and connect with people for connection's sake, just like a plant. So moving forward here, folks, let's begin to actually get into the guts of the Taittiriya Brahmana Sutra. Now, of course, this is Pushya that we have right here. This is just what I'm using as my example. The Nakshatra Sutras that come from Taittiriya Brahmana. See, a sutra is basically back, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they weren't writing things down. They wanted to create these cyclical, repeating sutra motifs where they knew that they could only fit so much into each line in order to memorize the qualities of what they were talking about. In this case, this is the nakshatras. The ancients wrote this genius cryptic thread of poetry that was intended to condense the knowledge of the nakshatras into 27 lines that were 6 words in each line. Only 6. Although within these words, there's compound words. That's just Sanskrit for you. And each one of these slots is going to have not only the word you see, but also the slot it takes up implies something. And this is what these slots are. And this is done in order to, again, condense. It's one thing to say, oh, this word is here. Oh, there's this word. But then there's another thing to say, oh, this word is in the 3rd slot, and that means a certain thing. Oh, this word is in the 5th slot, and that means it adds an inflection there. It's genius when you think about it. So that's how they used to do these sutras. And there's 6 words in each sutra. The pink word is going to be the deity, which rules the nakshatra in classical Vedic literature. The white word is the name of the nakshatra. That's the star pattern itself. And sometimes more obscure names are given or used just in order to convey more information. Then there's the foundation from above. This is what is needed for the nakshatra to function properly. And then padastat indicates that, that the previous word here, the yellow word, is padastat, above, pada, like parachute. And then there's the foundation below, the blue word. And this is what the nakshatra desires to produce from what it gets, and that's avastat. So the nakshatra needs the yellow word in order to produce the blue word, and both of these are important for ultimately the health and psyche of any planet falling into that nakshatra. Now, this is one of the nakshatras that have got a whole lot of wordage going on. And this is our Anuradha Nakshatra Sutra. Now, I'm going to do my best. Oh, that was a good stretch. I'm going to do my best to carry through and accurately do this Nakshatra Sutra passage. If you like, you can check out Vic Dicara's website. He's got a YouTube video where he goes through all of the Nakshatra Sutras so you can intone them yourself. And the ideal is, remember, that the best way to learn about these nakshatras, if you're really into this, the best way is to memorize the Nakshatra Stotra and memorize the words, memorize the Sanskrit if you can, and run it through your brain, because sound is different from sight. Mars rules sight. It's a logic. Oh, this word has these letters, and these make these sounds. When we see it, it's different from when you close your eyes and intone the mantra. It activates a different part of your brain, the Jupiter part of your brain, which is language, which is inherent, the word, the mystical reality of sound that existed prior to humans coming here and discovering it. The wisdom of sound and of Sanskrit is like a book that nobody discovers. You blow the dust off of a book that was already there. So it's good to intone this mantra if you really want to memorize it. So I'm going to do my best with it. This is our Anuradha Nakshatra Sutra. Mitra Anuradha Abhyarohat Parastat Abhyarudham Avastat Om Mitra Anuradha Abhyarohat Parastat Abhyarudham Avastat. I'm going to do it one more time because I want to get the long A on Abhyarohat. Mitra Om Mitra Anuradha Abhyarohat Parastat Abhyarudham Avastat. The melody for that, of course, comes from Vic Dicara. I don't know where he would have gotten it from, but he's got teachers, I think, who probably would have passed that on to him. Okay, so that is the Anuradha Nakshatra Sutra. Now let's start digging into what all of these words mean. This little passage, of course, again comes from Ernst Wilhelm's 27 energies of the lunar mansions. I really wish I could find the title page for that. I can't believe that I can't, but I'm going to stop looking for it. Just for the sake of it, I actually do have it here on my computer. There we go. So it looks like this, in case everybody's ever interested. The energies of the 27 lunar mansions. So it's from Ernst Wilhelm, and it's a PDF that you can look up anytime for free, because Ernst just, God bless him, he is just that guy who just wants to get information out there about these wonderful wisdoms from the ancients. So this little bit here that we see, of course, we're going to hear from two different translations of this sutra. One of them is coming from Ernst Wilhelm here, and the other comes from Vic Dicara. So what I often like to say is keep in mind that Vic Dicara, his is very, he uses a decidedly enigmatic language to describe the Nakshatra Sutras. When I say enigmatic, what I mean is that he purposefully, when you're translating poetry from another language, there's two things you can do. You can do it to be concise, like etymologically precise. And, there's a lot of, like, for example, there's videos you can find on YouTube now where it says, if Japanese people were literally translated into English, and it sounds very strange. Oh, it's like, new meeting, hello. And that's what, like, when they meet someone for the first time, they say, new meeting, which sounds strange to us, but that's the literal translation. So Ernst does it this way, where it's enigmatic, and he's not trying to Englishify it. And that's why Ernst's translation gets to some very important roots, where he doesn't want to tell you what it means. He just gives you a very literal translation. Then when we get into Vic Dicara's thing, Vic Dicara smoothens it out and says, this is an English translation that makes sense for English-speaking people. And it's important for us, I think, to do both, because then we can see a more bare-bones original through Ernst Wilhelm, and then something a bit more refined through Vic Dicara, because God bless Vic, He's very good, but it's always still good to be mindful of the individual bias of the person doing a translation. So I digress. This is in the spirit of that. Let's look at what Ernst Wilhelm translates this to. So, of course, Mitrasya is of Mitra, of the friend, who is an Aditya. So Mitra is the friend, the penultimate friend, and it's that type of love that Mitra transmits. It's an Aditya. So we have Mitrasya Anuradha. So the Anuradha is of Mitra. And Anuradha is a plural, and it's literally along with the gifts, the well-beings, which sounds strange to us. But what it kind of means is this positive gifts that come along with Mitra, the friend. So it's Mitra's gifts, Mitra's well-beingness, with Mitra's positive expressions. And that's me tying into a bit of what Vic Dicara tells us, the positive expressions. But Ernst literally just gives us as these gifts of Mitra, the well-beingness that Mitra gives, is abhyarohat, which is ascending, rising to, or it's increasing. So there's an increasing that needs to happen, parastat, in order for the avastat to appear, and that is having ascended to or risen to. So obviously, there's a very similar roots in abhyarohat and abhyarudham. Abhyarohat is there's an ascending happening that needs to happen in order for ascension to occur. There's a rising and an increasing that needs to happen in order to have risen, in order for something to have risen. And this is what Ernst Wilhelm's sort of translation of this is. The well-being and gifts of Aditya Mitra is an ascending towards from above and the ascended to from below. The well-being and gifts of Aditya Mitra involves a sort of ascending, a mounting, as Vic Dicara says, an ascending towards something. And that is required, this ascending is required in order to reach a state of ascension, or having ascended to something. So Mitra, as this friend, and the well-beingness it gives, has this upward spiraling, rising effect to it. Now, of course, Vic Dicara gives lots of, Vic Dicara is very interestingly, openly, how shall I say it? He has a lot of erotic, and in the case of Anuradha, we can understand why. I think I can't put words in his mouth. I'm only a student of Ernst and Vic. And I should say anything you hear on this video is me interpreting their interpretations. Between you and I and the computer screen, I think Vic is very open about the fact, he even talks about it in his book, that the, eroticism is a neutral phenomenon. It's an energetic phenomenon. It's, not considered as taboo or faux pas as a lot of people make it out to be in modern times. The erotic, the sharing, the joyous sharing of energy between two people in ancient times was just a fact. Although it can get you into, it's intense. Anuradha, as we're going to learn, is an expression of the intensity, for better or worse, that can come from sexuality. But the ancients just said, this is what this is. They had no hang-ups about it. It's not good or bad, depending on how it's used. It's like a surgeon's knife. We want it to be sharp. And a surgeon's knife can cut to heal, but it can also cut to harm, depending on the intelligence and intentions of the person using it. But ultimately, we want it to be sharp. And sexuality and bonding and love are similarly like that. So we've noticed that Ernst Wilhelm has this very, I would say less erotic, less sexual overtones of the Anuradha Nakshatra Sutra. Vic Dicara sort of brings out this quality of it relating to a building up of energy together and then reaching a joyous sort of climax. And this is the French, because remember, we're talking friendship here with Anuradha. There's a soul kinship that is implied by things falling into Anuradha. And really, this sexual connotation can exist inside or outside of any relationship bond. The connotation of working with someone, enjoying it so much that it bellows into a laughter, an enjoyment, an ascended state where the two people together are both enjoying their interactions so much that there is a climax. But the climax doesn't have to be sexual. It can just be energetic between a platonic situation. That's very Anuradha. Although usually planets falling into Anuradha, especially the moon, but also the Lagna, the rising sign, will usually carry a sort of deep bonding connotation. And that usually relates to sexuality and to real romance and romantic connection. Now, again, that's just my take. Let's read through Vic Dicara's notes on this Nakshatra Sutra. So we read that Mitra means love. It's the unifier. Remember, mi relates to the word union. Anuradha is the result of love. That's what Ernst described as the gifts or the well-beings. So the Mitra's results of love, the unifier's result of love, is arousal, an ascension, and a looking up, an awareness of divinity, which is very interesting because divinity, you can think of it as a vine that's a center that branches off. It's forked, almost like Vishaka. We described Vishaka as being forked, forked meaning it's a split coming from a center. So it almost, Vishaka and Mitra, again, both have this soul kinship, where two people are birds of a soul feather who flock together, fish of a fin. A fish of a fin affinity. So there is this awareness of looking up and seeing a shared sense. And it brings the feeling of arousal, of ascension, of returning to a singularity that the both of us make up in this relationship. That's abhi aroha, which together becomes abhyarohat. And now we have the word abhi arudha, and that's having been aroused, that's ascended and even climaxed, is some positive orgiastic experience from these two people generating so much positive, fun, joy energy together that they come together and some kind of climax is experienced. A lot of the times this just simply means, for those who hang out and love each other and have, a lot of Anuradha energy, it just simply means laughter. An explosion of laughter, an explosion of giddiness, and a joy of working together for the sake of working together. So Anuradha is regarded as being good for happiness, pleasure, sexiness, fertility, romance, love, accomplishment, inspiration, and divine disposition. And in things related to these things, Anuradha planets and dispositions will go well. Now, when Anuradha has afflictions, planets with afflictions in it, or is just afflicted through whatever ways, it might show that there's an over-flirtatiousness. There's a person, this is a person who can be bored without having some significant stimulation. But positively, Anuradha inspires and delights while unifying and elevating. There's a lot to really digest there, anyone with strong Anuradha overtones can be this overly flirtatious character, because there's just such an enjoyment and a desire to enjoy the intermingling of two people who have positive energy together. And they look for this sort of thing. We can see how afflictions with planets or important points in Anuradha can bring out the excessive side of sexuality, of being lonely, craving to come together with someone. Now, Vic usually has two different translations for the total picture of this, of every Nakshatra Sutra. By the way, I didn't put it here, and I should have. But you can go on, I have to say this now, where I'm getting this information from, you can get it for yourself. Vic Dicara on vicdicara.com has a wonderful Nakshatra Sutras series. And it's on that series that Vic Dicara has these little slides with these the colorful slides that we're seeing here. It's in that series that he always gives this little blue square to kind of describe the Nakshatra Sutra. And it's always a little bit different from what he gives in the Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology. And that's this little book here. As you can see here, right? This book is the final condensation of his work with the Nakshatra Sutra classes. I highly recommend that series if you want to get into the nakshatras. It's the best. It's really got the core of this stuff in it. But also this book is wonderful too, and it has a further condensation. So in any case, we read Love's Reward, Mitrasyanuradha, his love's reward. It needs arousal to reach climax. It's a very cut and dry, very simple the way it's described here. And similar, there's not much difference between the two. The reward of expressing love needs arousal for some kind of climax. But remember, this is a great, Vic Dicara does it so well here, because this does get at the essence here. The reward of expressing love needs arousal for climax. That arousal is caused, remember, we can't look at these three pieces. It's almost like there's three pieces. There's Mitrasyanuradha, there's Abhyarohat Parastad, and there's Abhyarudham Avastad. There's these three pieces that are all blended together. So what this kind of shows is that the reward of expressing love needs arousal for climax. See, this is why it's good to just stew on it. You know, what I see here is that this describes in some way the true nature of love. And Vic is going to talk about it. You know, thankfully, he's already done the work for us. He kind of describes how the parastat and the avastat are a description of the first word. And so there's a need for this arousal, this soul kinship, in order to have a climax, and those two together are an expression of the reward of expressing love. And it's also the other way around. You can't really have arousal for this climax without the experience of the gifts of the reward of expressing love that comes from Mitra, which is union, which is that bond, the soul bond, the connection together between one soul and another. So it shows that everybody in general wants to have the arousal in order to have the climax, but that needs to be an adjunct of love's reward. It needs to be love's reward. And if it's not love's reward, then it's likely that this person is not going to get the parastat and is therefore not truly going to get the avastat in the way that they truly want. They're going to crave an empty shell of arousal in order to reach an empty shell of climax if the reward of expressing love is not a part of it. And this is a key thing that Vic is going to talk about once we get moving into it. Okay, so let's move on, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys are enjoying this. We're going to start digging into Vic Dicara's take on this Nakshatra Sutra even further. We've just heard about Vic's basic definitions of the words and phrases involved. Now we're going to dig into Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, and go a little bit deeper into each of these words and what it amounts to. Closer to the end, we're going to hear Vic's take on interpreting planets inside of Anuradha Nakshatra. So let's start digging in here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this comes from our boy Vic Dicara. I highly recommend all his work, especially with regards to the nakshatras. This is very rich. So when we read, what we first read, Vic begins by kind of digging into each of the words that we're using here. The first word is Mitra, and that's the word Mitra refers to love, because love is the instrument, tra, that creates union. Union is me. The god named Mitra is the god of love, affection, friendship, and cooperation. Then next we have Anuradha, and that's the nakshatra itself. Now the root word, which is Radhe, denotes an expression of love. And I'm pretty fairly certain, not 100% certain, but I believe there's a connection of Radhe to, of course, Krishna's lover, Radha. The only reason I'm not just fully running with that is because I'm not sure about the lines over top of the A's. Sanskrit's funny that way. You can have a line on top of that A, and now all of a sudden this Radha is very different from the other Radha. So I'm not sure about it. It would take, but the fact that it denotes an expression of love makes me think there's a similarity. But I digress. The root word Radha denotes an expression of love. Now the prefix Anu indicates sequence. It's something that comes after or results from something else. So the Anu Radha, and that means the result, the reward of expressing love. So Mitra, the instrument of unification, is involved in Anuradha, which is the result of love. Mitrasyannuradha. It kind of shows that the unity that occurs through Mitra expresses this expression of love. Now we have Abhyarohat. Aroha, we could see the word Aroha inside of this word. It means to climb, to ascend, and or to mount. And the word is often used to describe elevated, voluptuous, mountable things. Female hips, for example, are often referred to with this word. And it can also refer to the aroused male organ. Aroha. Now, when you add the prefix abhi to aroha, abhi aroha, it's basically a forceful intensifier. Abhi plus aroha, therefore, means the power of arousal. And due to Sanskrit grammar, of course, this is abhi dash aroha. When you bring them together, it's abhyarohat. So abhi plus aroha means the power of arousal. Love cannot give its reward unless it is aroused and stimulated. This is just part of the nature of love. There is this increasing of energy. It's like two people coming together. There's an ecstatic feeling of energy rising. The prefix abhi also implies being overpowered or taken over, falling. Not. I'm thinking like falling in love, but Vic doesn't use the word falling, so I'm not actually going to use that word. But the word abhi means being overpowered or taken over. So abhyaroha means to be swept up in arousal. So the result, the expression of union, is being swept up in arousal. And this leads to abhyaruta, which is a climax. It's a reaching of ascension or rising that happens to you through abhyarohat. So abhyaruda, the word aruda also describes things that are raised, elevated, and mountable. What makes it a bit different from the previous word, aroha, is that this describes an accomplished state. It's like a future tense. The objective has been reached. The highest arousal has been attained. And Vic tells us that climax is an excellent English translation here. Of course, Vic is just being poetic by using that word climax, because it's, we're ultimately reaching the best we can to try and find a description of these words. And people think climax related strictly to the sexual thing, but a climax of a story, a climax of anything, is this like peak moment of rising, of energy rising, essentially, right? So, in summary, let's just bring this down to our summary here. When the union instrument of Mitra, when affection is stimulated to a fervor, that's abhyaroha, and lovingly expressed, Radhe, it brings joy, which is Anuradha, and the most intense expression of affection, which tends to be sex, results in the most intense experience of pleasure, the climax, which is abhyaruta. So ultimately, when affection is stimulated to a fervor and lovingly expressed, it brings joy, Anuradha, the expression of that feeling of love. Expression, Radhe, of affection and love, Mitra, inspires us, abhyarohat, to experience life in a heightened, higher, more complete and perfected manner. It's abhyaruta. The feeling of that inspiration of experiencing life in a heightened manner is part of the bliss of Anuradha, taking the climax out of the specific sense and bringing the feeling into the rest of our lives. Anuradha can be a blissful way of channeling that when there are good planets happening there, especially. Or when you have your rising sign or your moon sign there. Now, I've already said a little bit about this. Vishaka and Anuradha are a nakshatra pair. Vishaka is the previous nakshatra. In some records, Vishaka is actually named Radhe. So there's Vishaka is Radhe, which is the coming together and expression of love, and then Anuradha is what happens after Radhe, after Vishaka, after the bond. So it's useful to compare the two nakshatras' attitudes towards sex and partnership. Vishaka wants to accomplish goals by getting what it lacks from a partnership. Anuradha, however, wants to experience pleasure in partnership itself for its own sake. In Anuradha, the goal is the love itself. In Vishaka, the partnership is a means to a goal. So we can say that the first nakshatra, Vishaka, is less mature and more masculine, as is in general how this works. I see what this is saying. Okay, so the first nakshatra, Vishaka, is less mature and more masculine, and that's the general pattern for all the nakshatra pairs. Purva Falguni and Uttara Falguni, Purva Bhadrapada, Uttara Bhadrapada, etc. And that brings us to our intro. Oh, the stretchies today. This leads us to our interpretation of the planets and points in Anuradha Nakshatra. So, of course, this again comes from Vic Dicara in his book Nakshatra, The Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology. Vic gives us the idea of what can be expected from generally planets falling into these nakshatras. And if we read deeply, even a planet that falls in this nakshatra and is good, like what we read is that Venus and the Moon are the better candidates for expressing what Anuradha's agenda is. Venus and the Moon. Jupiter's okay too, and Mercury is probably fourth. It's okay, although Mercury can blur the line between friendship and romance. I have my Mercury there, and I get it. So we're going to read a little bit about that here in a moment. Ultimately, I want everyone to consider that there's the natural alignment of a planet with the nakshatra, but any planet can be delighted here, and any planet can be afflicted here. If there is a very positive planet happening here in this sign, and if there's good things happening with it, if you've got Mars in Scorpio, I think that, if you've got Mars at the tail end of Scorpio, or let's say, we already know Jupiter does pretty well here. We read that the sun is not great in the sign of Anuradha for various reasons that we're going to describe. But the sun would be delighted by Sagittarius. So if the sun is at 5 degrees Sagittarius, the sun is being delighted by its friend Jupiter here. If it's got other delights from other friends, if it's got a trine to Jupiter, if it's got a trine to the moon, all these different things that are good for the sun, if it's in the 10th house, if it functions well, even the sun, which technically is not aligned with the agenda of Anuradha, it can still be delighted. And that delight will relate to the positive qualities that we're talking about with Anuradha. And so let's read a little bit about that. But it's also worth noting that afflictions to any of these planets can happen in Anuradha, and they will go bad for the reasons that we describe here too. So Anuradha, it's superlatively welcome in any romantic or sexual setting. But it has its weakness pertaining to topics requiring independence and self-reliance. As one of these pairing nakshatras, this is why the Sun and Mars, Saturn, and the nodes don't do as well in Anuradha. So usually an afflicted planet will have trouble acting independently in Anuradha. And this is especially true, again, if you've got the Sun or Mars or Saturn or the nodes afflicted in Anuradha, there's going to be the feeling that they want to do something independently, because these planets are like that. Like the Sun wants to create its own kingdom, but the Sun in Anuradha instinctively wants to do it through merging with other people, enjoying it for the sake of the pleasure of the partnership. But one's own kingdom should be its own independent thing. That's why the Sun is exalted in Aries. So we can see where Anuradha goes wrong. There's an unfolding of a frustration at not being able to be independent and self-reliant. When a planet goes really well is that we have an agenda with that planet that relates to romantic or sexual bonding or bonding in general, right? So when Anuradha functions well, it suggests good sexual and romantic bonding and the ability to achieve group goals and be successful in and through partnerships. Venus and the Moon are obvious candidates for bringing out these interpretations. Jupiter and Mercury also do well here, although Mercury blurs the lines between friendship and romance. I definitely can understand that. There are times when I fall in love with everybody in my life, and I can always see through to my soul being in love with their soul at some level. And it becomes hard for me to deal in business groups, etc., that don't have a friendship quality to them, a love quality to them. Every band that I'm in, I fall in love with the guys that I'm in this band with. And you got to be careful falling in love with a business project like that involves money, that involves investment of time and energy. If I'm going to do something that is my own kingdom's business prospect, something that I want to be known for, my legacy, me having Mercury in Anuradha makes it as though it can be, you become biased to the objectivity required in finding the best musicians for you, for me, for example. I'll hang with someone, even if they're not the best musician, that can bring my music out the best as possible. If I love them, I want to spend time with them and make music with them. It's a blessing and a curse, especially because for me, my moon also is starving my Mercury. So there's more of an affliction on Mercury there. So interesting things that I'm glad I can bring this example up for you guys to think about it. So Mars can also function well here because it does facilitate arousal in Anuradha. And Anuradha does require this. However, the independence and individuality of Mars is likely to signify problems in maintaining sexual relationships over the long term. So that's just an important way to sort of think about that. Again, if Mars is delighted, we can see by this that Mars will have delight. It'll be delighted in Anuradha. It'll have the sexual, masculine dimension to putting their energy into a bond, nurturing it, etc. There'll still be the Mars independent streak, but if Mars is delighted, it's delighted in Anuradha. So it's going to bring out these qualities of being able to bond healthily while still being independent, which is interesting. But if Mars is afflicted here, especially, we can see it'll bring out the negative qualities of Anuradha. Same thing with all these other planets. When Anuradha malfunctions, it usually especially indicates sexual frigidity and a sense of independence that actually interferes with achieving group goals. That would be the big thing that happens. Ultimately, if a planet's falling into Anuradha, it's in a part of the sidereal zodiac that's going to attract partnership. So it's important for us to bring up this dimension of it, The weakness relating to an affliction happening in our Anuradha is that energetically, your lunar energy is situated in the energetic realm of partnership. And the planets, Saturn and the Sun, falling in here are going to have this sense of independence that the planet's energy interferes with the lunar nakshatra energy, which means the independent streak of the Sun and Saturn and the nodes is going to disrupt It's like they unconsciously are attracting partnership and saying, okay, now that I have this partnership, I want you all to know that I'm very independent. I do not bend to anybody's will. These are my rules. I have this agenda to apply to this group. And everyone's like, okay, cowboy, relax. We all got our things that we got to do in the group here. Let's work as a group together. But the Sun or Saturn in Anuradha person says, yeah, just remember that I'm autonomous. I'm self-reliant. I can do whatever I want. Right? So Saturn, the Sun, and the nodes tend to hold on to their independence in a way that interferes with group goals. Saturn indicates frigidity, a sort of like, it's like a frigidity when it comes to dealing with groups that's just old, has settled very deeply. And again, Saturn is there. Depending on what Saturn rules in the chart, Saturn is going to attract the working out of the karma that Saturn represents in group settings. And when it does, everyone is like, it's almost like we have to bring Tommy, he's a little frozen sometimes when it comes to group stuff, but he wants to be in the group, so we'll bring him in. And then Tommy's there, he says, hey everybody, thanks for letting me be a part of this. And whenever group discussions happen, Tommy's a little bit back from it all. He wants to be in the group, but he just doesn't want to participate as naturally and organically and freely as everybody else does, but he still wants to be in it, right? Now, with the Sun, there's difficulty in long-term partnerships in particular. The Sun has an objective, almost has a Vishaka energy in it when in Anuradha. It has an objective that it wants to get out of Anuradha, but because the Sun is expressing its ego, and that's not necessarily when it comes to the ego, sometimes the Sun necessarily has to make space for itself in order to create its kingdom. And that's part of what Leo is. We all have to carve our kingdom through the Sun in some ways. So the Sun, as it tries to manifest its kingdom through Anuradha, eventually people will come to find, usually what happens when people come together in a group, they have their sun somewhere else. So I got my kingdom, and this is this group thing that I'm coming together for some reason, whatever reason. Someone's got a planet in the 8th house, and they've decided to be in a band, and I'm in this band for 8th house reasons, really. The Sun in Anuradha is in this group because part of their kingdom, part of their identity, part of what they do is to be in a group, right? Whereas this other person has the Sun, has other stuff and other nakshatras. They have their own kingdom that they build outside of the group, and they come into this group as an extra thing. The Sun in Anuradha says, this is my kingdom that I'm building, which means they got a firm grip on it, and they're trying to hold on to this group for a long time. So other people will tend to get away from, you're either building your own dream or you're building someone else's. And the Sun in Anuradha person feels like they are building their dream. And if you want to come build my dream with me, that'd be great. I can use all the help I can get. But eventually the other person's like, I got to build my own dream. So I'm going to keep doing your thing, keep building your kingdom. So the person leaves them, and now the Sun in Anuradha is left on its own, and there's that independence problem again. So that's why the Sun can have difficulty with long-term relationships of any sort in Anuradha. Of course, you have to look at the whole chart in order to really see how this is operating. You got to look at the 7th Lord, you got to look at the 5th Lord, you got to look at the moon. A person could have great romantic combinations in their chart, and then still have the Sun in Anuradha, in which case this karma will be here, but their good relationship karma will float them through it. This, especially with the Sun is more of like an objective career thing. It's like, I'm connecting with these guys in order to create this group in order to be an executive person, and like it's going to have less to do with marriage. But the sun's ego in Anuradha will play a part in the person's marriage. It will show up at somewhere along the way. Yeah, Rahu. So I always love doing my section on Rahu and Ketu for every nakshatra. So this is something I was supposed to premeditate on this and I didn't. Let's say Vic begins, no, we're going to begin with Ketu. So what if we have Ketu in Anuradha? Ketu in Anuradha can either have Rahu in Rohini or Rahu in Kritika, and each of those will be a different nakshatra interpretation. Ketu in Anuradha suggests frigid. So first of all, let's look at the negative qualities of Ketu in Anuradha. Vic Dicara tells us that there can be a frigidity or a need for emotionally and psychologically intense intercourse. Ketu is, of course, the shadow graha that represents a deep root inside of all of us. If you have Ketu and Anuradha, this is a very deep part of your soul's evolutionary plan. You're especially going to feel Ketu and Anuradha open up when you're 36. You're going to feel interactions with it when you're 43, when Rahu matures. And then at 48, the themes related to this Anuradha Nakshatra are going to bloom like a flower, for better and for worse, at the age of 48. And you're going to really know what your Anuradha energy is all about. Ketu in Anuradha is going to be very, very into this energy of bonding and connecting at the friend level, at this sort of soul bond that we know from Mitra. Ketu is going to always be looking for people who have a soul bond, the soul kinship. But because Ketu, how it works is that it's smoky. We're so close to it. It's a very important part of our emotional security paradigm. In fact, it's so important, like I often say, I wouldn't be here talking with you guys on YouTube, smiling with all this energy, if I didn't have Ketu operating in my life. Now, everyone has Ketu in different places that build this energetic security so that we can put energy with a smile and relish into our material affairs in the world. With Ketu, the Anuradha Ketu person is probably going to need the feeling of, for example, so what happens with Ketu is that we kind of feel like we've mastered it and we psychically anticipate it. And so we will almost, I call it a false pizza. It's like we're eating this cardboard pizza because we know we crave pizza so much that we just make it out of cardboard. We put like fake cheese on it, like little shreds of paper, and we eat this thing, calling it pizza and telling ourselves, this is pizza, this is pizza, this is pizza, because it's so critical to our emotional paradigm to eat this pizza. Now, if we were to actually eat a real piece of pizza, it would shatter us, because this means that I have not been eating the real pizza. This means that I've not been happy. This means that I've not been actually as stable as I would like to be. And that also means I got to let go of my fake pizza. And I got to get real cheese and I got to get real flour. It's much more of a deep process. The fake pizza is always easier to make. That's why we pull it together and tell ourselves that this is what my needs are. And as time goes on, you're going to realize that there's a real expression of your Ketu that is narrow, that is complete, and ultimately it'll never be as satisfying as what you think you can build in your imagination. We can make ourselves think that the false pizza is the best, but it's when you eat a real pizza, it'll never be as good as what you thought it would be in your imagination. It's only until Ketu matures that you realize that this is it. And this is the best way for me to get in line with this, is to accept the fact that my soul has form, and this is the form my soul is taking, and to not resist it. I've been doing a lot of work on Ketu and Rahu lately. So for Ketu and Anuradha, how I'd bring this together is that, if you have Ketu and Anuradha, there's a desire to bond. And to bond with people at the level of soul kinship. Birds of a feather. And if that is so critical to your emotional security paradigm, you're going to connect with people looking for that. And you think that you're good at finding people who have this shared soul connection. And if you don't, if you don't actually know how to have that soul connection, you're going to make yourself feel like you do. So you're going to essentially be connecting with people, not because there's a true soul connection there, but because you want a soul connection. And you're going to make yourself believe that me and this person are soulmates. Me and this person in this band that I'm with are soulmates. We've done this a million times together, and we work well together, and we laugh together, and I know it. And it's because it's your desperation to get out of suffering that keeps you in the suffering. It's your desperation to find a soul partner that keeps true soul partners away from you. And so Ketu and Anuradha eventually has to let it go, let the universe put it in your lap. And then all of a sudden you'll find that it has been there the whole time. There's been opportunities for it right in front of you. You've just been ignoring it because your ego was enjoying the false pizza. I feel pretty good about how I described that. So Ketu will go in turns of craving soul kinship with people, and sometimes even, will experience soul kinship, feel that they don't like it, and then ignore it for a long time. Usually, especially from 0 to 36, you'll probably feel like blending with people at the soul level is such an intense thing that it's almost too intense to really get into and enjoy it. But around 36 into your 40s, you're going to learn that this is something you have to experience and let go of your resistance to it. Now, if you have Rahu in Rohini in Ketu and Anuradha, it's going to be different from having Rahu in Anuradha. If you have Ketu in Anuradha, Rahu in Rohini, that's going to be one interpretation. If you have Ketu in Anuradha and Rahu in Kritika, it's going to be another interpretation, because the Kritika nakshatra, the Rahu nakshatra is going to bring different things out of the Anuradha nakshatra. So I digress. Eventually I'd like to make a video discussing Ketu in this nakshatra, Rahu in this nakshatra, but there's a lot there. I'm only 32, so if I keep doing this for a while, maybe I'll eventually get there. Now let's talk about Rahu in Anuradha. Rahu, first, let's read what Vic Dicara says. Again, for similar reasons, we see that there's, Rahu will be a bit different from Ketu. Rahu has has some affliction going on in Anuradha, and in general it brings this affliction. Remember, all the planets have a good or bad relationship with the nakshatra, grahas, I should say, and Rahu is a graha that has a certain relationship with Anuradha, and it's a tricky one because it's kind of negative. What we read is that when Rahu is in Anuradha, there's an exaggerated sexual need, and it attracts unstable relationships. So Rahu in Anuradha has exaggerated sexual needs for bonding and intercourse, and sort of almost even like attention, and has unstable relationships. So with Rahu, it's likely what's going to happen with Rahu and Anuradha is that you are going to crave the soul kinship. You're going to crave the me, the Mitra, the feeling that, like, the soulmate merging together. The feeling that this person and I are two birds of a soul feather, and that we are together in the soul, and that there's a deep connection there with us that's there regardless of what happens. No matter what, me and this person are like peanut butter and jam. We blend together well, and that good arousing energy that I feel from this person is worth me holding on to them no matter what. And the craving that Rahu has for absolute perfect experiences, wherever it is, it will always be disappointed. Life is never as perfect as Rahu hopes for it to be. But Rahu is going to, it's a head with no body. It doesn't feel how much it's infinite, it's abysmal. But that's part of the spirituality of Rahu. Rahu, how it usually operates is that you go completely hard, no holds barred, you go for broke on whatever Rahu is signified by. And by the time that you realize that you're in a state of, you're not letting reality give it to you organically and naturally. And Rahu will teach you this by being gluttonous about that thing, to the point where that thing, you'll never find that. You'll never find exactly what Rahu is looking for. What you'll find is slightly less versions of what you're expecting. And what Rahu needs to do is essentially accept that there's a limited expanse for how much the Rahu can enjoy and experience what it seeks. In this case, this is soul bonding. And so Rahu is going to sort of, really, like, what Rahu will do is kind of pin the person, or, say to the person, you're not perfect because of this reason. And it's not you, it's me. That's a very Rahu and Anuradha statement. It's not that you're perfect in your own way, but I'm looking for a person who is like this. And the Rahu is going to the Rahu and Anuradha person will press on the person to bond with me in the way that I want to be bonded with. And the person will do it if they love you. They'll put up with it for a long time, but eventually they're going to have to use their voice. I recommend that you listen to the voice of your partner and say, when they tell you, I do love you, but this expectation that you have of me is unrealistic. I'm not that thing. And you might stomp around and say, well, looks like we're not really soulmates after all. And then you go away from that person, you might think about it, and you think, like, at some level with Rahu, you're just going to have to search for the least of the evils in people that you could be bunking with. And if you've got several people who you feel have the possibility of being the soul mate for you, you got to think of the least soul bonded, the least of the evils. And if you have a person who loves you, who is close enough, but whom you really feel ultimately like this is a person who has love, they're communicating with me, they're going to show you, Rahu and Anuradha is going to bring partners who show you where your expectations are unrealistic and fantastic and almost hallucinatory and delusional about expecting a person's soul to be a certain way. You're looking for this perfect soul and nobody is ever going to satisfy it, but you'll probably attract lovers who remind you that this is probably close enough. Like, really reach deep down into your soul. Feel what we've built together. everything that we've been through together. And now I'm just here being honest with you about what's really in my soul. And hopefully comes a point where you're pulling the imaginary mirror out of people for them to perfectly reflect the perfect partner for you. They'll do that for you for a while because your Rahu seems to bring it out. And that's where this exaggerated sexual need comes from. It's all, you're this thing, you're this thing, you're this thing. And the sexual energy comes out very strongly, and it can bring unstable partnerships. And hopefully at some point in your life, probably especially around 36, around 43, what's going to happen is that your Ketu, which is probably going to be falling in Kritika or Rohini, is going to open up and recognize that there is an individuated part of you that you need to settle on within yourself. And that you can't look for your soul to be saved by your partner. And therefore, in Kritika, it's, I need to work things out independently. And Anuradha is a relationship karma. Anuradha Rahu. So if you've got Kritika Ketu, Anuradha is a relationship karma that brings you back to yourself. If you've got Rohini Ketu, Anuradha is a relationship karma that reminds you of what a natural and healthy relationship is supposed to look like, so that you can be independent within a mature, bonded relationship. Rohini's bigger on the relationship theme, Rohini Ketu. Kritika Ketu is more focused on the independence issue. But in either case, you've got Rahu and Anuradha, and the Rahu and Anuradha karma is going to bring out and exacerbate the delusion of seeking perfection in another person, which is obstructing your relationships and obstructing your partner's ability to just be honest about who they are. Yeah, I feel good about that. I'm getting better at this Rahu Ketu thing, I think. But that's coming from my own brain. I hope you guys think so too. Let me know in the comments. So, that has been our planetary interpretation of planets in the nakshatra of Anuradha. I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys dug that. Nice. Cool. So Darshita, I'm glad that... Thank you, AQ Anim, for answering our other viewer here, Darshita. But yeah, this is Anuradha Nakshatra, and we just discussed Rahu and Ketu in Anuradha. So now we're looking at the overall life lesson of what Anuradha as a whole can teach us. And again, this is coming from Vic Dicara, Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. We can draw some life lessons from this Nakshatra Sutra as it's given here to us. And of course, the Nakshatra Sutra is the one that we've been discussing. Mitrasya Anuradha Abhyarohat Parastat Abhyarudham Avastat. Right? So this is our Nakshatra Sutra that we've been talking about. And we can draw 3 life lessons from this sutra. One about love, another about sex, and a third about the relation between the two. What we learn about the relationship between sex and love is that union, Mitra, is how love expresses itself, Anuradha. Love expresses itself by bringing parties together, forming nations, communities, teams, partnerships, families, and couples. Sex is the most intense example of bringing people together. All well-known means of expressing love involve union, kisses, hugs, holding hands, sharing ideas, or just being together and doing things together. Since sex is merely the external expression of love, it follows that the true pleasure of climax cannot be experienced without actual, real love. Sex without love is an imitation of Anuradha. And the climax it produces has the external form, but not the internal soul of true pleasure. Such sex actually aggravates and exacerbates our wants and needs. Nothing is more frustrating than the experience that the pleasure we seek is so close, yet so elusive. That would be our second lesson related to sex. Now, this sutra also teaches us that good sex doesn't happen by chance. There is art involved, the art of abhyaroha. It's a powerful arousal. Pleasure is a result of satisfying desire. So the art of pleasure is to arouse and intensify desires before fulfilling them. That's real tantra. It's not necessarily just the attacking the desire, but it's the cultivating the appreciation for the satisfaction of the desire. An internal trick that's tantric. It's a very tantric expression, which of course is fitting for this very tantric nakshatra and nakshatra sutra. Now, finally, the sutra teaches us a lesson about love, which is also a lesson about happiness. The greatest mystery of all is that the greatest happiness arises not from trying to be happy, but from trying to make someone happy. It's Radhe. This is a very difficult lesson to realize, however, because in practice it fails very easily. It requires that both parties involved in the exchange are bound together, Mitra, union, in genuine and sincere love. The weaker that bond, the less effectively the magic works, and the more prone it is to actually backfire and produce instead intense misery. Very wise. And this is an important lesson for everybody dealing with Anuradha energy. It's the hope of this love bond connecting with another person, meeting them on the other side, and the meaning of my life being completed by the unfoldment together with this other soulmate. When that doesn't happen, it can be a very painful thing. Just as painful as the bliss of getting it. So Anuradha sometimes has to be aware that the only way to have your cake and eat it too is to be patient and let the universe move what you seek into the frame of your immediate experience. And whatever the universe gives you, a lot of the times you've got to reckon with it as the gift, as exactly what it's supposed to be. Because sometimes with Anuradha, that intense pain of not getting it, especially with the nodes in Anuradha, the intense pain of not getting what you seek is sometimes just part of the karma of being one who seeks that thing. And you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, but you're probably more damned if you don't. If you just ignore this karma, if you don't seek love and soul kinship. Not seek it, but you don't have to ignore and get away from the sore spot of love completely, and you don't want to go into it completely. You want to find the balance, accept when the pain is there, accept when the bliss is there, and be attached to neither the pleasure or the aversion from the pain. And you will move through life with the energy of this nakshatra neutrally, and therefore not reacting to that which you can't control, and therefore blissfully. I think we wrapped that up pretty good. So we have a supplication. each time we do these nakshatras, we do this little supplication. And this is a prayer that comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana, which Vic Dicara has picked together and put here as sort of a prayer of supplication to Mitra, the deity that rules this nakshatra. The supplication goes, "Let us prosper by offering prosperity to others without self-interest. May Mitra's friendship extend to everyone. May we live 100 autumns full of virility and vitality. It is well known that beauty leads to love. So, Chitra leads Anuradha to rise, bringing Mitra's golden radiance into the sky." Cool. That's deep. I suppose on the sky, on the ecliptic, Chitra would rise first, and then after Chitra rises, there would be 1 or 2 nakshatras beforehand, and then that would lead to Anuradha, and that's Mitra's golden radiance rising in the sky. And Chitra begins it with the beauty of the pearl. Cool. Psychedelic. There's so much to these nakshatras that we're all unfolding on, you know. Beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was a good time. We still have one more reading left to go here. And this, of course, is going to come from our final reading of the day. It's the divine forces of the Lunar Nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas by an author known as Radhe. And that's R-A-D-H-E. So Radhe is a writer whose work comes from somebody who is rooted in the sidereal tradition of astrology. They work with essentially the same nakshatras that a tropical Vedic astrologer like me does, because of course tropical zodiac signs revolve around the sidereal zodiac. I try not to call it that, because the sidereal 27 nakshatras are not a zodiac. Zodiac relates to the zoo, of the animals. The nakshatras are a whole different wheel in itself. And we both are looking at the same sidereal portions of the sky. They've been the same way for 3,000, 4,000 years, for all time. So the author of this book is a sidereal practitioner, but we have to keep in mind that there are times when, through her tradition, she might bring about and speak to qualities of a nakshatra that might have some of the distortion points that we've mentioned, which means that essentially Radha's work on Mitra, for example, could have the energy of the distorted sidereal tradition mixed in with it. Now, the reason I say this is because it's important for us to essentially, there's still good work in her book. So I invite all of you, as people interested in Mitra Nakshatra's character and personality qualities of the native, to read what you hear with a grain of salt. Try to see if you can be as discerning as possible, because there's still good stuff that she describes here. This is the classical Sanskrit tradition has spent a lot of time digesting the moon and the rising sign in a nakshatra. So if you've got your moon in Anuradha, if you've got your rising sign in Anuradha, or any important point, the Atmakaraka, if you've got like a stellium of 5 planets in Capricorn, and Saturn falls into Anuradha, all those 5 planets are going to be channeled through that Saturn falling into Anuradha. So that would be an important, The main ones, though, are the rising sign and the moon sign. The rising nakshatra and the moon nakshatra. So if you've got either of those falling into Anuradha, this could give you a bit of a glimpse into your character. So this is the Anuradha native by Radhe. What we read is, Anuradha's congenial disposition is evidenced by its divine Deva Jyotisha classification. That's one of the qualities that I don't usually put I digress. The Deva quality is given to Anuradha. There's Devas and there's Asuras, and then there's also Rasikas. I haven't done enough work with the Deva stuff, but I think that they do have a tripartite thing which relates to Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And so Deva would mean that it has sort of a sattvic quality to it. Don't quote me on that, but I think that that's where that's coming from. So Anuradha has a congenial disposition, evidenced by its Deva Jyotisha classification and its Mridu, soft quality. So only Mrigashirsa and Revati share those attributes. According to Jyotisha Shastra, Mridu nakshatras are favorable for making friends and engaging in intimate unions. That comes from Brihat Samhita. Now, top principles governing the life and actions of the native include the golden rule, which is treat others as one would like to be treated, non-injury to others, that's ahimsa, and truthful speech, truthful, mindful speech. Indeed, one can expect this native to be true to their word, assuming the same of others. The Mitra-ruled person often seals agreements with a mere handshake. Because we're going to do this, yeah? Good? Great. You know, you can depend on me on it, because this is where their bread is buttered, is the union itself, right? So they're big on their word, which is a beautiful quality. Nice to see you, Catherine Perry. I'm happy to be sharing my time with you. Now, right, so this is a moment where the author says that Anuradha resides in the deep waters of Scorpio, and so it has these qualities, but we're going to skip that because we're tropical Vedic astrologers. Now, what we read is that certain aspects of Ram Dass's life are exemplary of Anuradha's compassionate and giving nature. I'm very excited to talk about this. I love Ram Dass. Ram Dass was a character who was born in the 40s or 30s, actually. Grew up to be a Harvard-educated professor, and he was a real brilliant Harvard-trained psychologist. And his whole story is beautiful because he says everyone's looking at him and saying, you got it, you understand, you went to Harvard, you know, you're the intelligent person. And inside, he's got this Harvard degree, and everyone's like, oh yes, you're one of the highest, happiest men of psychology. And he wasn't actually happy, and he knew that it was all bullshit. And so he went to India, and he got a guru. He actually did a bunch of psychedelics. He got into mysticism with his fellow Harvard ally, Timothy Leary. The two of them loved each other, and Ram Dass eventually went to India, and that's where he truly found his happiness. So Ram Dass has the moon in Anuradha, according to Radhe here. So Ram Dass's nature shows the compassion and giving nature of Anuradha. So eventually, having foregone the use of psychedelic drugs, Ram Dass embarked on a spiritual quest in India. At the same time, he worked selflessly and with great empathy to assist the homeless and the dying in particular. Ram Dass eventually helped found the Seva Foundation, whose primary goal is to treat blindness in developing countries. Interestingly, it's through Mitra's eyes that blinded Bhaga is able to see. Right, so Bhaga, who's the god, one of the nakshatra deities, can't think of which, Bhaga was blinded in the old Vedic stories, and it was through Mitra's eyes that Bhaga was able to see. That's interesting, I guess, because Ram Dass was treating, he founded a foundation that was treating blindness in developing countries. Importantly, Mitra is one of only a handful of nakshatras, devatas, that are rarely found competing in the divine contests of the gods or the countless battles against the asuras. Mitra, the deva, so Mitra is one of the nakshatra devatas, and he doesn't carry even a single weapon of combat. However, the Anuradha native eventually realizes that he must develop strategies to survive in this dog-eat-dog world. For example, Mitra pairs up with formidable Varuna in order to uphold his value of ahimsa. This duo, it's Anuradha and Shatabhishek, which rules Varuna. This duo and their good cop, bad cop act works most effectively. Like Mitra, the native is particularly adept in situations where cooperation between others is sought, but power and authority are imposed by another. Another example of this is the divorce counselor, Mitra, who does his best to amiably reconcile a couple's differences, and the judge, Varuna, who declares the terms of the divorce settlement and custody arrangement. So, Mitra is a divorce counselor who is honest and amiably reconciles the couple's differences, ideally. And then Varuna, if Varuna's working well in a person, then there'll be a good judge who sees the genuine intent that Mitra expresses. Other promising avenues for these two include a career. Oh yeah, so actually, this is just for Mitra. So these are promising avenues for Mitra in career. Include a career as a negotiator, an arbitrator, a counselor, or a therapist. Because Mitra can really see what the person is for who they are in a lot of ways, and can have compassion for them, which is very useful in therapy and counseling. I'm reminded of, there's a classic image of the difference between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. Carl Jung would be seated with the person, and the person's right here with Carl Jung. Carl Jung is holding their hands and listening to their story, has his hand on his heart. I understand. I understand what you're going through. I really feel it. Now let's talk about how we can work through it. What Sigmund Freud would do is that he would get his patient to lay on the bed, and Sigmund Freud would stand behind their head as if he was this domineering, overlooking father figure and saying, "Now tell me about your mother." And he's not holding his hand and being compassionate and really getting into the therapy and the counseling with the person. He's overlooking from this fatherly, stark perspective and pinning the person with things that would cogitate realizations of why the person is living their life wrongly. So there are two different methods of psychological analysis. I'm more of a Jungian guy myself, but it goes to show that there are different ways of dealing with psychology. Not to completely diss the Freudian thing, I'm not a psychologist, so I can only say so much about it. But I think Anuradha caters to more of the Carl Jung approach. That's the reason I brought this up. More of the holding the hand, having the true compassion to be a therapist in this way for a person. Mitra ruled Anuradha. Sounds pretty lovey-dovey for a nakshatra located... Okay. So, I'm going to skip the Scorpion part, but Anuradha, it says it's in the heart of the Scorpion. That's a sidereal statement. But what it does also say, though, is that Anuradha is hemmed in by cutthroat Vishaka and Jyesta, which is ruled by Indra. So there's Vishaka, there's Anuradha, and then there's Jyesta. Vishaka and Jyesta are probably the most cutthroat characters in the Zodiac. In the Nakshatras, because the Nakshatras are not a Zodiac. Excuse me. Have to get my language down. But Vishaka and Jyesta are the most cutthroat amongst Nakshatras. And Anuradha is between them, so it's kind of hemmed in. So, just as Mitra willingly abandons his virtue of ahimsa when under great pressure, affliction and other planetary conditions can bring out the other side of Anuradha. In this case, harmonious and stable friendships can be impossible to sustain, for one's own needs trump those of friends and family members. So this is an independence. I'm stuck on all these people, and I want to be independent. I want to have my own life. I don't want to depend on these people. I want to be self-reliant. This causes us to unnecessarily burn bridges and cut ties that we didn't really need to cut in the visceral way that we did if there's afflictions in Anuradha. So similarly, Mitra being this truthful person, ideally there's an innocence that comes from the mindful truthfulness of Anuradha. But the truth in speech theme of Anuradha can be an excuse for blunt and hurtful words. Or the native may reject truthful speech altogether and work on perfecting the art of verbal manipulation. When things go awry in the chart, especially when there's strong afflictions in Anuradha, compassion becomes attachment, and the golden rule becomes an eye for an eye philosophy. If you're going to do that to me, I'm going to do this to you because we're bonded and that's what we're doing. So this is an example of where Anuradha can go very awry when it's afflicted, like I said. The two extremes of this nakshatra are as different as Hello Kitty and Darth Vader. Darth Vader is a good guy who crosses over to the dark side of life. So Anuradha can take it very personally and lead to great bitterness when they find that people have abandoned them because, again, especially depending on the affliction, Anuradha expects that they're going to have soul bliss with other people. And when there's afflictions in Anuradha, sometimes life isn't going to give it to you. And when life doesn't give it to you, the inverse of the bliss of climax and orgasm can turn into like what's the word? Like an incel type of consciousness. They feel victimized. The world never gave them a chance to have this bonding. While everyone else does this bonding thing so naturally, everyone must hate me. It must be my problem. It must be because of something that they're doing. And there's a bitterness. We could see how this bitterness can come through afflictions in Anuradha. It can be a very painful and scary thing, which is something that I didn't even read into that side of it, but I see that in what we're reading in this reading by Radhe. Now, some of what I just said is kind of me rolling with my intuition. Some of it is bouncing off of what Radhe is saying here. We still have to keep in mind that Radhe is a sidereal practitioner. She might be reading some of this from the fact that anciently Anuradha existed completely in Scorpio. So having the moon in Anuradha, they correlated it with moon and Scorpio qualities, which nowadays the moon can be in Anuradha. It'll probably be in Sagittarius, which is very different, much happier, peppier. But still, I think that what we've read here can be seen to have it does make sense that there would be this dark side to the bliss hoped for in Anuradha when there is strong afflictions there. Or just simply when the person has the moon or the rising sign here and they've got difficulty happening all throughout the chart, these feelings of victimization, if I never got the love that I sought, it's the universe's fault. These kinds of qualities will come out. And so if you're an Anuradha person, look for those signals within yourself as a signifier that the universe isn't actually out to get you, and you're not necessarily a victim of circumstances. You are just experiencing the backdraft of a hope that is natural and healthy inside of your lunar asterism, but which has gone awry at this chapter in your life, and you can see that it's gone awry because these feelings are coming up, in which case you would do well to get into relationship counseling, to get into some kind of psychological therapy that's going to show you and help you get this desire in balance so that you're not struck and debilitated by the feeling that there's a soul partnership that you're missing out on. Developing that independence while not leaning towards the incel extreme of being so independent that you can't relate with people at all, because that's only going to further fester the feeling that you are not bonding. So that's the best advice I could probably give in terms of if things are really going awry for an Anuradha person in a chart. Ultimately, Anuradha is built on positivity and bliss, and most people, I think, won't have such problems. But if you do have those problems, it means you're not strange or out of the ordinary. Everybody has these moments in life. Even if you've got good things going on in your chart, these moments happen. And there's always people who can help you, whether it's an astrologer or a psychological counselor or your friends. In your case, the feeling of the antagonism would maybe cause you to not ask for help. I'm here to tell you that it never hurts to ask for help. That's the wisdom of the moon. Use that wisdom wisely and allow what we've read here to be a marker for when you might do well and be well served to ask for help. Okay? I hope that's helpful. Now for today, ladies and gentlemen, I think that is our reading today. This has been our delightful reading on the wonderful Anuradha Nakshatra, ruled by Mitra. Now, if you're watching this, keep in mind there is more to talk about from Mitra. The character of Mitra will be, it is one of the deities of Vedic astrology. So keep your eyes out. I'm probably eventually going to have an end screen that'll show it, like right here, showing my reading of Mitra from the classical Vedic texts, and that's what we're going to get into in that video. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. Akwe Anim has been hanging out. Catherine Perry, who is Taurus Rising, very nice to see you. Darshita, what a lovely day. It's nice to see you. You're Anuradha Rising. I hope that this has been good for you. Tia KC, the Thick Boy, Maui Logic, Toxica, all of you folks. It's very nice to see you guys hanging out with me live. For those watching at home, I appreciate your viewership. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought. I hope this was a good time for all of you. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Keep your eyes peeled. I got lots more stuff coming out. I've been fired up this year. It's the year of the wood dragon, and wood is a creative energy for me, being a water horse on my day master. So I've got lots of creative energy moving through me. So keep your eyes open. I got lots of stuff coming out. Thank you so much for watching, everybody.